Hi everyone, and welcome to the Ornament Girl, where we love sharing tips, tricks, and patterns for creating beautiful no-sew quilted ornaments. My name is Kennedy, and in this video I'll be showing you how to make the Union Jack ornament. This ornament was designed by Sherry and it's created on a soft foam cube, so you could use it as a hanging ornament by adding a hanger to the top, or it makes a perfect tabletop sit-about ornament as well. Before we go any further, be sure to check out the link below the video to grab your free printable supply list we've included with the pattern. And as a quick reminder, this pattern, along with all Ornament Girl patterns, is copyrighted, and it's illegal to teach or distribute it without our permission. If you have a friend you think would love to make this ornament, be sure to send them the link to this free tutorial. In order to create the Union Jack ornament, you will need a soft foam cube, satin straight pins, fabric, ribbon, and a few ornament making tools. As you can tell from my ribbon and fabric cuts here, you need a few different specific lengths and widths of ribbon pieces. So again, be sure to check out that printable supply list we've included with this pattern so that you can see the breakdown of exactly what you'll need in order to create this ornament. Once all of your tools and materials are gathered, we can begin creating your Union Jack ornament. The very first thing we're going to do is cover the face of the cube using a 4-inch square of blue fabric. Lay your 4-inch square of fabric on the working surface with the pattern side facing away from you, and then center your cube on that fabric square, and you can lift up both pieces, and you just want to make sure that the fabric is extending equally beyond all 4 sides of the soft foam cube. And then you're going to carefully fold the edges down over the edge of the foam and pin them in place using about 5 pins. So I'm just going to pin the edge of this square in place along the side of the foam using about 5 pins. And anytime you're pinning near the edge of the foam, any of these sharp corners, you want to make sure you're angling your pin in toward the thickest part of the foam so that you don't poke through a corner and hurt yourself. Now carefully stretch the fabric across to the opposite side of the cube, and you want to stretch it a little bit to help it lie nice and smooth, but you don't want to fold in the edge of the foam at all. So you don't want to tug super hard and create a dent in the edge of the foam, but you do want to help the fabric lay as smooth as possible. And you're going to continue this to pin down all 4 sides of the square using 5 pins each. Once you've pinned down all 4 sides of the fabric square, we're now going to pin down these corners. And to create a nice, smooth, mitered corner, you're going to pinch both sides of that fabric corner and fold it downward one way. And it doesn't matter if you fold it to the left or the right. You're just going to fold it over the edge of the foam and pin that corner in place so that you have a nice corner on the edge here. And you're going to repeat that for all 4 fabric corners. Now that the base square of fabric is added, we can start using ribbon to create the flag design. And the first thing we're going to do is add some marker pins. So we're going to add a marker pin below the top right corner, which means you're going to measure down from the top right corner, and at the 1/4 inch mark, push a pin halfway into the foam. So I'm pinning sideways into the side of the foam 1/4 inch below that top right corner, and you can leave this pin sticking out about halfway because we're going to use it to help us place our pieces. Now you want to do the same thing for the bottom left corner. So I'm just going to bring this bottom left corner up to the top right. My pin is now here at the bottom left. And I'm going to measure down again by 1/4 inch and place that marker pin. My tape measure is a little bit beat up here from being used on so many ornaments, but if you can't see it, I'm just pinning 1/4 inch below that corner. Now we have a pin at the bottom left and the top right. Now we're going to place two 5-inch pieces of our 3/8 inch wide white ribbon. So we have white ribbon that's 3/8 of an inch wide, and you should have 5-inch pieces. You're going to lay this ribbon piece diagonally on the foam, and it should sit below the top right pin. So the top edge of my ribbon is just touching the marker pin at the top corner. It's not up here above the pin. It's below it. And then you're going to pin it in place on the side of the foam so that the pin is not on the front of the ornament. And if you pull on your ribbon and it comes through the pin like that, like mine just did, you just want to pin further away from the edge. That will give your ribbon a little bit more security. And then you'll bring it down to the left on an angle, and now you want it to sit just above the marker pin. So the bottom edge of my ribbon is just touching that bottom left marker pin. Make sure it lies nice and smooth, and then pin it in place. Remembering to angle your pins in toward the thickest part of the foam. And now you can remove those marker pins, and we're going to do the same thing for the opposite two corners. So now measuring down from the top left corner, and I'm just going to flip this around so that I can get my 1/4 inch mark lined up with the top edge of the foam. Place a marker pin 1/4 of an inch below the top left corner and 1/4 of an inch above the bottom right corner. So now when you're looking at your ornament, you have a pin in the top left and a pin in the bottom right. This second piece of ribbon is going to sit just below that top marker pin, and you can pin it in place. And then angle down and sit just above the bottom right marker pin. And it's a good idea once you pin these in place to add a pin to the center of the ornament as well, especially if your ribbons are kind of slippery. You can add a pin to the very center to hold them in place and then remove those marker pins. And now that we've added the white stripes of the flag, we're going to add the skinny red stripes on top. And for this, you will need your 2.5 inch pieces of 1/8 inch wide red ribbon. So we have our skinny red ribbon here. And on the Union Jack flag, these red pieces are not completely centered. So you can see here that we don't just have a diagonal red piece going down the center of the white strip. On the left side of the flag, the red pieces are moved down, and on the right side of the flag, the red pieces are moved up. So that's why we're going to place each of these individually. So at the top left, you're going to line up your ribbon piece so that it sits just above the bottom edge of the white strip. We have just a sliver of that white showing beneath it. And you can pin it in place at the center and then bring it up to the top left. Fold it over the edge of the foam and pin it in place there. And if you need to straighten anything out, you can. I think I'm gonna lift it up in the center just a little bit. And now we're going to do the same thing for this bottom left. And the red ribbon will be sitting toward the bottom edge of the white ribbon. And again, you can pin it in place, pin one end in place near the center of the ornament, and then bring it in a straight line. Now I need to move this piece downward a little bit. I'm following the stitching on the edge of my ribbon, but you can play around with it to get it into the position that you want. And then fold it over the edge of the foam and pin it in place. Now we're going to do the same thing on the right side, but this time the stripes sit closer to the top of the white pieces. So again, you're pinning near the center of the ornament to pin down one end of the ribbon, but you want it offset toward the top of that white ribbon just a little bit. Fold it over the edge and pin it in place. making sure it sits nice and smooth over the foam. And then for the bottom right, you are again going to follow the angle of the white ribbon, but offsetting the red piece up toward the top a little bit. And now that we've added these ribbon strips, the next layer of the flag is going to be created with fabric pieces. So you will need 2 rectangles of white fabric that measure 1 7/8 by 4 inches. And you're going to fold these in thirds. So if your fabric has a pattern side, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you, and then fold the rectangle in thirds lengthwise, getting a skinny rectangle, and that should measure about 5/8 of an inch wide. So you can measure your rectangle here. Make sure it's 5/8 of an inch wide. I'm going to make mine just a tad skinnier and crease those folds. And then you will lay this on your ornament vertically at the center. And instead of measuring to find the exact center, you're going to use these blue corners to help line things up. You can see that if you're off center, your blue corners will not be symmetrical. You want to make sure that the blue shapes you're creating on the left and right sides of this white strip look the same on both sides, and then you can pin it in place along the short raw edges at the side of the foam. Bring it straight across the ornament and then pin it in place along the other short edge as well. And I'm using 2 pins to hold this since it's a little bit wider of a strip. And now we're just going to do the same thing horizontally. So folding your rectangle in thirds to get a strip that measures 5/8 of an inch wide. And now you'll lay this horizontally over the ornament, making sure it looks nice and centered, keeping those little blue triangles that you're creating right next to it symmetrical on both sides, because that'll really show on the finished ornament. If you look at this and you can tell that these middle bands aren't really running through the center of the ornament, that'll just make everything look a little off kilter. So you want to take the time to line those up and make sure the triangles on both sides are looking equal. And once these strips are pinned in place, we have a couple more ribbon pieces left to add. Now you'll be using your 4-inch strips of red ribbon that's 3/8 of an inch wide. So now we're using red, and it's not skinny. We're not using the 1/8 inch wide. We moved up to the wider ribbon, and you're just going to center these pieces right over those white bands that you just added. So you're making sure there's an equal amount of white above and below. And then of course, when you pin it in place, the pins should sit on the side of the cube so that they're not showing on the front of the ornament. And then do the same for the vertical piece. And with those ribbon pieces added, we've created all the pieces for making the flag, but the Union Jack flag in real life, of course, is not a square, it's a rectangle. So now we're going to add a border to the top and bottom of the ornament to outline the flag in the correct shape. Now using your flexible tape measure, you're going to measure from the top and bottom edge. So you don't want your pieces to be turned this way where your skinny pieces are moved in toward the center at the top and bottom. It should be oriented this way with the X running across the wider part. I'm going to turn my ornament to make it easier to measure, but I'm measuring up from the bottom of the ornament, and you're going to add 3 pins. And these will sit 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and you only need to push them in halfway because they're marker pins. So near the left and right edges and at the center, I'm measuring up from the bottom of the ornament and adding 3 marker pins that each sit at the 1/4 inch mark. So when you're looking at your ornament straight on, you'll have a little line of pins here that sit a 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge. And now you're going to use a rectangle of your background color, a 4-inch rectangle. Hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half lengthwise and crease the fold. And with the folded edge on the top, you're going to lay this on the ornament with that top folded edge just touching that line of marker pins. So I have my top folded edge creating a straight line that's just touching those marker pins. Fold the left and right corners down over the foam and pin them in place so that you can keep this in a nice straight line. I keep losing my grip on things here. And once the left and right corners are pinned in place, you can very carefully fold this fabric down, and you don't want to tug this rectangle out of place. You want that top folded edge to stay just against those marker pins, but you're going to fold this down and pin it in place along the raw edges using, I'm probably going to use 5 pins here. You could get away with 3, but for some extra security, it's a good idea to use 5. And then of course we're just going to miter those corners. So pinch both layers of the fabric and fold them over to one side or the other. It doesn't particularly matter. And pin it in place. And then once that's pinned down and you remove those marker pins, you can see that we've started outlining the flag. And now we're just going to do the same thing on the opposite edge. So I just flipped my ornament around. I'm working along the opposite edge and I'm going to do the same thing. So measuring in and adding 3 marker pins at the 1/4 inch mark. And then using a rectangle of the background color, you're going to fold that in half lengthwise and crease the fold. And then lay that top folded edge right against those marker pins, creating a straight line. And fold the corners over on the left and right and pin them in place. And now ever so gently fold the bottom raw edge down without tugging the top folded edge out of place. Fold that bottom raw edge down and secure it with a few pins. And now pinch, fold, and pin each of those fabric corners to create nice finished mitered corners. And then once those are pinned down, you can go ahead and remove the marker pins. And now you can see that you have created that rectangular flag outline on the front of the ornament. And remember, this should be turned so that on the left side, the skinny pieces are toward the bottom of the white pieces. That's how you're going to know that you have the Union Jack flag oriented correctly. Now to complete side 2 of the ornament, you are simply going to flip this over and complete all of those exact same steps on the back, so you can take the video back to the beginning of creating the flag and repeat those exact same things on this side of the ornament to create the flag back here as well. Now I do want to mention that you don't want to accidentally turn your ornament and create your flag going the opposite way. You want to make sure that your diagonal white pieces angle up toward the same corners on each side of the foam. So just keep that in mind as you're creating the flag on side 2 of the ornament. But other than that, all of the steps will be exactly the same, so you can go ahead and complete those now. Once you have added the flag to both sides of the ornament, you want to double check that it's oriented correctly. So when I'm holding my ornament this way, on the left side, the skinny red pieces are toward the bottom. And when I flip it over it's the same thing on the back. So that way when your ornament is sitting, no matter which side you're looking at it from, it will be oriented correctly. And now we're going to cover these raw edges and pins with a few fabric bands. So first you want your 3-inch wide long strip of blue fabric. You're going to hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold each long raw edge in toward the center. So you don't have to fold it completely in thirds, but you can overlap those edges a little bit. And you don't have to fold the entire strip at once. We can work with just a few inches at a time. And then flip that over so that the raw edge is facing away from you. And we're going to lay this at the top center of the ornament. So again, make sure when you're looking at the flag, the skinny red stripes on the left are toward the bottom of the ribbon pieces. And you're going to lay this at the top center of the ornament, and it won't reach the edges of the cube, and that's okay because we're going to add another layer of bands here. So you just want to center it and use a couple of pins to hold it in place. And now keeping the long edges of the band folded in toward the center, wrap that band all the way around the outside of the cube. And it's going to start to cover the raw edges and pins, but if it doesn't cover everything, that's fine, because we're going to add some skinny bands on the outside as well. And you want to pull it tight so that it lays smooth on the foam. And when you return to the top center, use a couple of pins to hold it in place, centered with the top of the ornament. And then you can trim off any extra fabric. And now we're just going to add a couple more bands. So now I have some long skinny strips of my background color. You're going to fold this in thirds lengthwise with the pattern side facing out. And then flip it over so the long raw edge is facing away from you. And you're going to start at the top center, but instead of keeping this centered over the side of the foam, you want to line up the long edge of the band with one edge of the cube. And again, you can use a couple of pins to hold it in place, making sure not to cave in the edge of your foam when you push that pin in. And then keeping this folded in thirds, wrap it all the way around the ornament, and you can see this will create a nice outline covering the raw edges and pins. And again, you want to pull it tight enough that it lays smooth over the foam. And when you return to the top center, staying in line with the edge of the foam all the way around, when you return to the top center, use 2 pins to hold it in place. And trim off the extra. And now just repeat those exact same steps to add a band along the other edge of the foam. Once you have all 3 of those fabric bands added, we can now use ribbon to bring this stripe motif onto the band as well. So with your 12.5-inch piece of white ribbon, this is 3/8 of an inch wide, you're going to center this within those bands and pin it in place at the top center of the ornament at the starting and stopping point of those bands, and then wrap it around the ornament, keeping it centered so there's an even amount of blue on each side. And when you return to the top center, pin it in place and trim off the extra. And now with a 12.5-inch piece of skinny red ribbon, we're going to do that right on top of the white ribbon, pinning it at the top center, keeping it centered over that white ribbon. and wrapping it all the way around the foam. And of course, pin it in place at the top and then trim off the extra. And now that we have our band created and we've kept that stripe theme going throughout the ornament, we can add some ribbon bows to the top to cover these raw edges and pins. You're going to start with a 28-inch piece of ribbon, and I will be showing how to do the gift bow style method of making bows. That helps me to keep everything nice and even, but if you prefer the loop and pin method, you can do that as well. You can also check out the ribbon bow and embellishment library on the Ornament Girl website for lots of different bow tutorials. But beginning with your 28-inch piece of ribbon, you're going to put the ends together, which will form a fold at the very center of the ribbon piece. Cut at the center fold, and you now have 2 equal pieces of ribbon. Holding those together in a stack, fold them in half, putting those ends together, and again cut at the center point, and this will give you 4 equal pieces of ribbon. And now this time, when you fold them in half one more time, keeping them in a stack, you're going to pin down through that center point, catching all of the ribbon pieces on the pin. And then you can flip that pin over and spread those ribbon pieces out on the working surface. And then one by one, fold each end of the ribbon back and onto the pin until you've created a total of 8 loops. Once you've folded back all of the ribbon ends, you can flip that pin over, and now you can see that you've made an adorable bow, and you're going to pin this right into the top center of the ornament, and you can use those ribbon pieces to cover the raw edges and pins. And now we just have a couple more bow layers that we're going to add. Using a 26-inch piece of ribbon, go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to make a second bow. Once you've created that second bow, you can pin it right on top of the first bow that you placed to add another layer. And now we just have one more layer left to create. You'll use a 24-inch piece of ribbon to repeat those exact same steps to create a third bow. Once you've created that third bow, go ahead and pin it right on top of those first 2 bows. Now you have a beautiful fluffy tiered bow on top of your ornament, and now we can add a hanger. If you're choosing to use your ornament as a sit-about and you don't want to add a hanger, you can just use a pearl head pin and pin it right into the top center of the bows to cover up that exposed pin head. But if you'd like to add a hanger, you can use a 10-inch piece of string, put the ends of that string together and tie them in a knot, and then using your pearl head pin, pin right through the knot on the hanger string. And if you want to trim off those extra little fraying tails, you can do that. And then you will pin this right into the top center of the bows, covering the pin head and adding a perfect way to hang your ornament. Once you have finished adding the ribbon bows and hangers, if there are any other embellishments you'd like to add to your ornament, such as beads or rhinestones, you can feel free to do so now. And once all those finishing touches are complete, your Union Jack ornament is finished. I hope you really enjoyed making this quick and fun ornament along with me, and I can't wait to see all of the adorable Union Jacks that you create. For more ornament making tutorials, tips, and tricks, be sure to subscribe to the Ornament Girl on YouTube. Thanks for watching and happy ornamenting!